All right, thanks for coming. This is the last presentation of the last day. So if you are here, you're very dedicated. Thank you very much. I know you could be home drinking a beer, but instead you came to my presentation. So I'm very grateful. This is my first time ever at BriForum, presenting and being at BriForum. So I hope that I come back, and that depends on you. That depends on you giving feedback to Brian and the rest of the crew. Okay? So my name is Yury Magalif. I'm a principal architect for cloud computing for a integrator out of New Jersey called CDI. We are a regional integrator. And I go out and do consulting for Fortune 500 companies and educational institutions and government institutions. And a part of my job, a big part of my job, is virtual desktops. And one of the very important part of doing virtual desktops is doing antivirus. And that's why I'm presenting on it. I thought this is a topic that there's not a lot of material out there, but there is some. So I'm hoping that I will contribute with my share of material. So the agenda for today is, first we're going to go over design decisions, current antivirus or agentless antivirus, which one. Then we're going to talk about how to configure the parent VM. Then we're going to talk about vShield Manager, on what everything is based on, the VMware technology. Then we're going to talk about Trend Micro Deep Security Manager, and then about the Trend Micro deploy and filter driver and appliance, and then about protecting the actual VMs. Finally, we're going to talk about connecting your View desktop and checking your installation. And then finally, we're going to talk about some Trend Deep Security tips and McAfee Move agentless tips. So first, design decisions, current antivirus or agentless antivirus. Well, the goal is to minimize I/O. Why? Antivirus scans have a big load on your storage, also processor. But the storage is the most important here. So if you have a lot of virtual desktops and you start scanning them all at once, they're going to slow down to a crawl. Okay? Unless, of course, you have SSD and so on and so forth. So before these technologies here, we had to manage with regular antivirus. Okay? But now we have other options. So the biggest thing in deciding between current antivirus or agentless antivirus, again, is I/O. And the best white paper out there, and I think one of the only white papers out there, I think the only white paper out there, is from Project VRC that Brian has advertised, and I read that white paper. And basically the gist of the white paper, they compare different antivirus solutions, and they compare regular antivirus solution versus the agentless antivirus solution, and come out with some conclusions. So here, just a couple of words about this paper. You can go ahead to Project VRC and download it. I didn't write it. I just wanted to summarize it a little bit because this is my primary reference point for actual proof that I/O makes a lot of difference, and a big reason why you would be choosing an agentless antivirus. So here, they tested McAfee VirusScan Enterprise 8.8, which is a traditional antivirus solution that has an agent inside the VM and scans inside the VM, and they have a lot of different statistics, but the point is that the I/O overhead was 50%. Okay? So that's all nice and good. Then they went to McAfee Move Multi-Platform, which is a solution from McAfee that is not quite agentless, but it has a server that's doing the scanning, an offload server. So the scanning is not done in the VM, but on that offload server. But yet there's still an agent inside the VM. So it's kind of an in-between between regular antivirus solution and agentless solution. And with that, they had an I/O overhead of 16%. Okay. However, when they tested the same company's Move Agentless Antivirus, which doesn't have any agents. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. It has a light agent, okay, but it doesn't have a full agent. And the I/O overhead is 10% at most. And there's no all write, no reads. So the conclusion is, using agentless antivirus, you will reduce the amount of I/O and therefore increase the performance of your virtual desktops. So I know this is only one white paper, but just from practical experience, before agentless antivirus came out, we used to do these, staggering the antivirus scans, tweaks in antivirus, turning off some features of real-time protection. And of course, once you start turning off features, what's the point of antivirus at all? The point is that you have all these features to protect you against viruses. All right? So now that we have agentless or virtually agentless antivirus, this is a much better solution, and that's something that I've been using for all my clients that I deploy VDI for. So let's talk about the first solution from an antivirus manufacturer that came out. And this is from Trend Micro Deep Security. They bought a company out that already had the solution, and then therefore they were the first ones out with this technology. VMware established this technology and told antivirus makers, hey, go ahead, make it work. But not a lot of people took them up on the offer because people were afraid that virtual desktops are not going to take off. Well, guess what? Virtual desktops are taking off, and the solution is slowly but surely is taking off. And now almost every manufacturer is working on things. For example, right now, only Trend has the most robust and the solution because they were first. McAfee had the next solution. There's also, I believe, Kaspersky came out with a solution, and I forgot if Symantec has a solution yet, but they used to, Symantec for a long time didn't have a solution. They had like a staggered and optimizations and staggered scans and so on. So first, let's talk about Trend Micro, because that's the most robust solution and the one that I deployed a lot. How to configure the parent VM. And the goal is to make this configuration easier. So the first thing you do is when you install VMware tools, you go through the interactive installation, and you choose custom, and under custom, you make sure to choose this VMCI driver, and under that, the vShield drivers. Okay, so what is VMCI? VMCI is basically a way for the VM to communicate outside the VM with whatever is outside the VM. Okay, if you think of a movie The Matrix, it's like it's like that guy Morpheus that travels back and forth from the Matrix to the outside, right? So VMCI is kind of like that guy Morpheus, all right? And of course, the VM is the Matrix. So this is the first thing I have to make sure that gets installed, okay? Next is something that's actually not in the manual, but it's in a couple of knowledge base articles, is that in the properties of the VM, of the parent VM, there's this thing called VMCI device unrestricted, and then there's a checkbox enable. I always enable it. Why? Because quite a few knowledge base articles out there, if you didn't have it enabled, it just wouldn't work. Now, supposedly the latest version doesn't need that checkbox enabled, but I will always enable it anyway, because it doesn't hurt. It reduces security somewhat, but then you can compensate with security in other ways. So check the box, please. Then you go to the Trend website and you download something called the Notifier. So what is a Notifier? Well, in an agentless model, what happens is there's a very thin vShield driver that VMware makes that sits inside the VM, and then outside is an appliance that does the scanning. Okay, so the VMware driver does it, if it detects a virus, it's going to report back to the outside to the appliance, say, look, I found a virus. Can you check? I think it's a virus. Can you check it out? And this all happens in the background. The user has no idea that this is happening. So as users using the virtual desktop, let's say they catch a virus. Well, normally they wouldn't know about it. They would go about their business and catch more viruses. Well, that's a problem because you want the user to, some situations, to be aware that they caught a virus so they stop doing whatever they're doing. So this notifier is just a little driver that's in addition to the VMware vShield driver that sits there, that you install, that if it catches a virus, it will tell the user about it. And it pops a number of these pop-ups. Now, in my experience, some of my clients, they saw these pop-ups in the virtual desktops, and when the goal is to minimize any user interruption when you get into your virtual desktop, they were annoyed that this pops up. So in those situations, I actually didn't install a notifier. Okay? They were okay with the fact that the user wouldn't know there's a virus. They'll know there's a virus. It actually makes the administrator looks a little better if they catch the virus ahead of time before anybody notices. Okay, so that was kind of a political / annoyance thing where people don't want to install it. Okay, so it's not for everybody, but in the majority of situations, you can manage the notifier. And you can right-click on the notifier, and there's the 2 checkboxes: notify when malware detected, when malicious website detected. Okay, and you can open the console. It has just a little bit of information in the console. You'll see later that there's information on what viruses were caught and put into quarantine. Next, let's talk about vShield Manager. So vShield Manager is the underlying VMware technology that antivirus manufacturers build upon. So you have to install that first. The goal here is when you install this whole solution, not just vShield Manager, but all of these solutions, there's instructions from VMware, and then there's instructions from the antivirus manufacturer in the manual. And sometimes they're kind of similar instructions. You should always follow the manufacturer antivirus manual because they have a much more comprehensive approach in the manual. Whereas if you follow VMware's manual, it's kind of missing things. Okay, it tells you, oh, go there, and it doesn't say anything like where to go. Whereas the manufacturer, step by step, they even talk about the vShield Manager and how to do it. So just follow the manufacturer manual, you'll be fine. So first, you get the vShield Manager from VMware, and you deploy it as a OVF. Okay, you go to your vSphere client, you go in the menu on the left, say deploy OVF, basically deploy an appliance, and open it up, and then you just follow the wizard, and it prompts you, do you want this, do you want that? You just follow the wizard, and you'll be fine. It's a very automated type of installation. Once you got the vShield Manager imported into your VMware environment, and I do talk about VMware because that's my primary focus. I'm sorry about the Citrix. Some of these solutions do work with Citrix, okay, but I'm not a Citrix expert by any means. So anyway, once you import the vShield appliance, vShield Manager appliance, then you open up the console. You log in with default credentials, admin and default. You type enable, you type setup, and then you set up regular things, IP address, DNS, okay? And once you set that up, you can then go to the IP address in the browser, type in the default username and password, and you will get in, okay, inside the interface. I don't show all the slides because I would have had too many slides here, okay? So once you get in the interface, the first thing is you should change the default password because it's well known. Then you should start setting up the other pieces of the infrastructure. You should take vShield Manager and point it to other pieces, okay? To vCenter, to VMware SSO, single sign-on. So this configuration is where you specify where the VMware single sign-on server is. In my case, I will take questions afterwards for 15 minutes, absolutely, and stay as long as necessary. It's just that otherwise, if I take questions, I never get through to the end, okay? So please hold on. I will definitely answer all your questions. So you set up the connection to your VMware SSO, okay, over here. In my case, it's the vCenter server appliance that I'm connecting to instead of regular vCenter, but it doesn't really matter. Then you set up the connection to actual vCenter or vCenter server appliance. An interesting thing here is that you can do backups of the configuration for this solution. And you should. There's some configuration in there that you should. It only supports FTP protocols, so you must have an FTP server set up somewhere. And you could set it up here, and then we'll upload files to the FTP server occasionally. You should set it up because there's quite a bit of small things that you could lose if you don't back this up. Okay? And especially if this is linked into your whole infrastructure. Okay? So then, once you have this configured, when you go to your vSphere client, I'm talking about the full client, but also in the web client you can also see that, but there is a tab called vShell that shows up when you click on one of your ESX hosts. And when you click that tab, you'll see that the pieces of the vShell infrastructure are shown here. Okay? And VMware, besides the antivirus piece, which is called the vShell Endpoint, VMware also makes vShield app and vShield data security, and those are basically advanced firewalls and packet inspection firewalls. This is not the focus of this presentation. I never install those, okay? When I install VDI, I need antivirus. I install just the antivirus piece, and I disregard everything else. Now, these pieces are good for other purposes, but for your plain vanilla VDI installation, you just need antivirus. So, you go into here, and then next to this vShield endpoint, there's an install button. You hit that install button, and that will actually install the vShield component onto the server. All right, and here's one of the screens here. You know, it's going to start installing it here. And once it installs, it'll say uninstall here. That means it's installed. All right. Interesting way to check it also is if you go to your networking configuration for the host, you will see a strange thing show up, which is this standard switch that just showed up out of nowhere. Okay. Now this will show up even if you have a VMware distributed switch. This will still show up. The first time I did it, I was like, "What is that?" I just deleted it. Okay. Guess what? I broke the whole installation. Had to wipe everything to start from scratch, okay? Don't touch this switch. Just look at it, enjoy the naming convention, and leave it alone, please. The other thing, interesting thing is, I'll talk about it on another slide, but there's another interesting thing about this. So the next portion is, we want to install the management for Trend Micro, okay? The manager that controls all of these pieces and all the other pieces of the antivirus solution. So the first thing is for the manager, you should have a Windows VM with at least 8 gigs of RAM and 4 cores. Right? There's no appliance for this, so you do have to make a Windows 2008 R2 64-bit VM. Okay. And then you should have an external SQL or Oracle server. Now this thing does come with, Trend Micro Manager does come with its own server, but that's just for trials. Okay, don't use that for production, you're not supposed to. So go to your SQL server, wherever that is, and make a database. And one important thing is make sure that the recovery model for SQL Server database is simple. Otherwise, you will have logs accumulating. And for this kind of database, you don't really need to protect it that well. You know, this is not your most important database. So I usually set it to simple to us to avoid the logs. Then you download the manager component from Trend Micro, bless you. And double click it inside your VM. My VM is named TrendMan01. And then once you go through the installation, here's a portion of Microsoft SQL Server settings. I use the SA account for this particular database. If you have a large SQL farm, ask your SQL administrator what they want you to use. The account must have DB creator and system admin privileges on the database itself. Okay, but this is a test installation, so I use the SA. In small environments, it's okay to use the SA. Then you will enter the license, and here's where I got confused first. When you buy the solution, well, first of all, when this solution came out, the first thing I did is I bought the wrong solution. I bought the Trend Micro Office Scan first, because the sales guy was like, well, you know, you gotta buy this, and I researched it, and yet I bought the wrong solution. So I had to return it, buy the right solution, and then I bought the wrong licenses, okay? So the idea is that you only need a license for anti-malware and web reputation if you want to have an antivirus. You don't need a license for firewall, integrity monitoring, and log inspection. You can do all that, but you don't need that, okay? And also, you know, for those components, you would need to set up the vShield, app and data security, okay? So that's the only license you need. Once you put it in, you're going to be fine. Then Deep Security is going to ask you if you want to install this component called the relay. Well, so what's a relay? Trend Micro has this architecture where you can have another server that will download the updates and then, you know, send these updates over to wherever they should be, antivirus updates. So that's called the relay. If you have a really large infrastructure, you can have a separate relay. However, if you have a small to medium infrastructure, you can install a relay on the Trend Micro Manager server. All right? But you only get the screen if you take the relay installable, which is an MSI, and you put it in the same directory where you started the Trend Micro Manager installer from. So you put it in there, you get the screen. If you didn't put it in there, you can install it separately. It's a little more hassle, so just put it in the installable right in that directory, and you'll get the screen. Just check off the box and anti-malware box right there, and you should be good. Once you get it installed, it's a web-based application. You go in to the name of your server, port 4119, and you can log in with your credentials, which is master admin and whatever the password you specified. The first thing that you should do when you log into this interface is you should go to the administration portion, okay? And administration should go all the way to advanced. I have actually cut off on the screen here, but all the way to the right there's advanced. And under advanced, all the way at the bottom is this checkbox called hide unlicensed modules for new users. Yes, we're all IT people, so we all know our stuff. I have to say this product has a lot of options, and you get easily lost in them. So when you check this off, all those options they don't have licensed, they'll just either disappear or they'll be grayed out. So you never have to touch them. So very useful checkbox. Then in Trend Micromanager, you point it to VMware vCenter. Okay, so you go into this computers and there's actions and you go add VMware vCenter. And once you add that in with the default credentials, it's going to ask you in this wizard to add the vShield manager. Okay, and here where you put in, you should always put the DNS names. You can put the IP addresses, but establish a convention. You either put all the IP addresses or you put all the DNS names. If you start mix and match, you're going to have issues. Okay. So once you got that pointed, now Trend Micromanager sees everything, and now in its interface, you'll see your whole VMware infrastructure, all your hosts, all your VMs, your data centers, and so on in the tree. And now you could apply policies to it and so on and so forth. The next thing to do is install something called the filter driver and the appliance that scans each host. Okay? So basically the mechanics that VMware came up with of how this is supposed to work. So the first thing is these two things, they have to be imported into Trend Micro Manager. So you go to administration, you go to software updates, and hit that button, import software. And then in there, you can point to the downloaded file that you download from Trend Micro. You can actually download it within the application. You can, but I prefer to just go to the website and download it separately. So you point to this filter driver file. A point of confusion is this. For example, you see in here that the relay is an MSI, okay, and the manager is an EXE. So when you install the manager, you should have the MSI relay as is in there, because that's how it likes it. But when you import the filter driver and the appliance, there are zip files. So don't expand them. If you expand them, it's not going to work. It's not going to import them. It wants it as a zip file. So this is a little bit of confusion there. Okay, so choose the filter driver and then choose the appliance when it asks for it. And once you have that imported, you can go to software, and you can actually see, there's a software dialog, and you can see the imported software. So you can see I have filter driver, appliance, and a relay installed earlier, and the two agents, it's just installed by itself. Okay. Once you have the filter driver and the scanning appliance in, then you have to deploy them to your ESX infrastructure. All right? So the next thing you do is you go in this tree here. Like I said, everything is in here, your data center, your cluster, your virtual machines. You select one of your ESXi hosts, right-click, actions, and there's a prepare ESX. Okay, and you choose that. And then once you do that, you go through the wizard. There's a few things in the wizard. I missed them, that they're basically defaults. An important thing in here is this screen. It says that the ESX server needs to go into maintenance mode to deploy the filter. The filter driver is basically a kernel-level driver that gets installed into ESX. So the box has got to go into maintenance mode, and it has to be rebooted. So if you have production stuff running on it, well, guess what? You have to schedule it off hours, and you should plan it carefully. And here it asks you, do you want the Trend Micro to automatically bring the server into maintenance mode and then handle the reboots? In I think the first couple of versions of this product, I said no. Okay, I'll do it manually. If you have not that many servers, you could do this manually. But latest version of the product is pretty good. Okay, it does a thing. It's not buggy. It does it. Okay, it does it well. So I choose yes in most cases. Okay, especially if you have a lot of servers, just choose yes. Okay. And once it goes to the maintenance mode, your VMs will be migrated off, or you can migrate them off ahead of time. Okay, and put DRS into partially automated mode. And then once you click finish here, what's going to happen is this thing is going to go into ESX, put it into maintenance mode, deploy the filter driver, reboot it, wait, detect that the ESX said, I'm okay, I got the filter driver now, I'm reporting back to vCenter, and once it's all nice and good, this wizard will give you a nice green check mark. The only problem is there's no progress bar. So once you hit the finish here, you'll be kind of stuck until it finishes reboots. Don't be worried, you're not stuck, it's just doing its thing. I mean, one thing that you can monitor is you go in your recent tasks in your vSphere client, and you'll see it doing things, disconnecting hosts, initiate reboots, and so on and so forth. So that's how you can track its progress. And here you go. We have the check mark. Okay? The wizard, once it does the check mark, this is a better wizard. In the first versions, it didn't have as nice of a serial workflow. Okay? Now it tells you, okay, next thing is we're going to deploy a security virtual appliance now. You want to do this? You say yes, of course. Makes your job much easier. And for the appliance, you specify, what its name is, what its data store is at, and the folder and the network. Interesting thing is you'll see later what data store you put it on. If you put it on the shared data store, the appliance, you'll see later, the vMotion has to be turned off for it. And thank God in this version of the product, it does it for you automatically. If you put it on a shared data store, the vMotion is disabled for this security appliance. They used to not do that, okay, or not do it well. Now it is disabled. Also, if you have a local data store for each server, because there's an appliance per server. So if you have a local data store, if you deploy it onto a local data store, it will never get vMotion because by default, anything in a local data store cannot be vMotioned. So you can do that also, okay? But I actually prefer a shared data store and have it turned off, okay? Because it's much easier. Put in the IP address, static. It wants to do DHCP, and if you forget and you just hit next, it'll just go ahead. And I think I've done that once. It's not good. It doesn't like DHCP, okay? Later. So put in the static address, please. Here it is installed, okay? And next thing it wants to activate. So once it deploys the filter driver and the appliance, and then wants to activate them. So yes, say yes, you want to activate. Once it goes through the activation phase, you can go into the vShield tab on your vSphere client, and here now, right there, okay, on the bottom, you'll see that the appliance is deployed. And even though the appliance came from Trend Micro, vShield Manager piece listed here, because the technology is really VMware's technology, and then the manufacturer just piggybacked on top of it. So here it is. Here's the appliance. And then, like I was saying, if you go into the DRS settings, okay, you'll see that for this appliance, the automation is disabled. Okay, so it's not going to be vMotion. So good, we deploy the appliance now. Next thing is we need to protect the virtual machines. I know, there's a lot of steps. That's how the solution is, okay? It's a little scary at first, but when you have, 50% overhead to 10% overhead of I/O, you're going to be using it, okay? First time I saw the solution, I said, oh my God, there's a million pieces, what am I going to do? Okay, this is ridiculous. But then I got used to it. Now it's much better. They've ironed out a lot of kinks. So next, we're going to protect the VMs. So in the wizard, it's going to tell you, do you want to activate the host virtual machines? So if there's virtual machines on the host that you just went through, deploying things onto, it's going to look at these virtual machines, and notice in here I have my view parent, okay? If you have your view link clones, it's going to pick those up, okay, and they're going to show up. Anything that's in there and that works right now, it's not turned off or anything, is going to want to protect, okay? So yes, you select them and you say yes. Remember beforehand you already prepared your parent with your notifier, okay, and also your vShell driver, so everything is in there, and all the link clones that are spawned from it, if you were to use those, everything is ready, right? So all you do is you activate it now, and they're going to be protected. Well, to a degree, okay? It says it's protected, but in reality, it doesn't. So if you stop at this point and do nothing, which again, I've done, okay? When you test it for viruses, it's not going to pick up any viruses. And you're going to be like, oh, what's going on? Why is nothing picks up viruses? Well, that's because you didn't assign a policy to the container where your VMs are, so that now it can actually turn on this functionality. So the next thing is you right-click on whatever the container you want, the VM here itself, or the folder. You could apply a policy to any of these containers, and you right-click and you do assign policy. And in policy, there's numerous pre-made policies. Okay, the point is you just pick one that protects it. There's like 2 things in there, and it's called Microsoft Windows policy. There's multiple Microsoft Windows ones. Just pick the generic Microsoft Windows flavor one. Don't go with, oh, Windows 7, this and that. Just pick the regular Windows one. You can kind of see it over here. Once you pick the policy and you hit apply, all right, it's going to say sending policy. Right there, it's going to say status, sending policy. Okay? And once it finishes, it's going to say managed. Okay? One trick in here is that when there's an error here, this status here shows the last error. So if there was an error, it would show up in here, and you'd think, "Ooh, there's something wrong with my VM." But there's nothing wrong, because the VM, see this little green triangle? It's kind of hard to see. Little green triangle. It means the VM was okay, but here we could be displaying an error. To clear that, you just right-click and do clear or acknowledge error. And then it will say managed online. All right? So once we did all that, okay, we deployed a filter driver, appliance, we activated the appliances, we protected and activated the VMs, and then we deployed a policy to the VMs. Then, if we go into that tab in vCenter, for vShield tab, there's a button called Endpoint. If you hit that, you will see that your virtual desktop is over here. Okay? This is just another check to see that vShield pick up that virtual desktop. And if yes, then you will see it over here, and it says Thin Agent enabled. And then you want to assign a policy again to a container. Okay. I think I have a slide out of place, but that's okay. All right. And then if you right-click on a VM or a server or something, you could do right-click and there's details. There's no properties, but there's details. And when you hit details, you will see that screen, which is very useful because it tells you a lot more information. So here, what you should be looking at is, right here is the policy we deployed, Windows Anti-Malware Protection. And then here's the status. You can see that anti-malware real-time is green, and web reputation is on. That's what you should have. Okay? All these others you don't need, and they're not licensed. And remember, because we hit that checkbox, things are grayed out. All right? So everything is nice and green here, policies in here. It means it's all good from a trend manager point of view. So now we deploy the solution. Now we want to connect our View desktop and test if we catch a virus. So let's go catch a virus. So you connect to your Horizon View desktop, and as far as this being a dedicated or floating desktop, or whatever it was called before, persistent, non-persistent, stateless, stateful, it doesn't matter that much which one it is. This solution protects equally well, and I think since I have more experience in deploying floating or stateless desktops, it protects those even better, in my opinion. Okay, because with other antivirus solutions, you have to think about uniqueness of the agent for each machine. And when you have floating or non-persistent desktops, they get spawned left and right. And then if you have any kind of agents, sometimes they can pose a problem. For example, Semantic Agent for a long time had an issue where if you clone desktops that had the same like ID, I think it relied on SID. I forgot, either SID or some other ID, and you had to go through this procedure to try to make sure the ID is unique, and it's kind of difficult. So this solution works well with stateless and stateful desktops. So how do we test it? There's this organization called ICAR, which is the European, I forgot, but it's this body in Europe that I think it does some standardization. I forget the exact acronym, but it's EICAR.org. You go there, and there's a button to download their test file. So what's a test file? Well, this test file has been a standard established to make sure that you don't test your solution with real viruses. So this test file is basically a string, a text string, that every antivirus maker out there recognizes as a virus, but it's not really a virus. It's just a test thing, okay? And you could make your own. You can actually copy this text string into a text file and rename it as ICAR.com, and it will be picked up by the antivirus solution as a virus. You could do that, or you could just go there and download theirs, all right? So you go in there, you click on it, and guess what? You got a virus, all right? At the bottom here. And you think, oh, great, my solution has just worked. But no, it didn't. It does catch a virus, but what you forgot about is that Windows has some built-in features now that can catch some viruses without even an antivirus solution. One of which is called Smart Screen Filter in Internet Explorer. If you have that on, that will catch the ICAR file, and Trend wouldn't even know about it. Well, great, but you may want to turn it off. Okay, first you want to know that Trend's working, or McAfee, and then you don't want to have two antivirus solutions competing for resources in your VM. All right, so Smart Screen Filter in Internet Explorer is just a checkbox in the Internet options, and then also if you have Windows Defender on, it can catch that. All right, so don't forget with Windows you want to disable Windows Defender. So this guy, I believe this one is Windows Defender. Smart Screen Filter looks a little different when it pops up with a virus prompt. So what does the real virus prompt look like from Trend, let's say? Here it is. If you go to a web page, it says page is unsafe. This is what you should be looking at. If you got that, that means voila, it worked. But this is just downloaded from the web. You also want to test actual copy of an opening of a file. And here it is. We just try to open it. Well, I couldn't even open it. As soon as I put it on the desktop and literally I just hit paste, this dialog popped up saying that they can't find the file. Why? Because by the time I hit right click and paste, this thing already detected that there's a virus and deleted the file. Okay? And then it pops this dialog because of Notifier, right? It pops this dialog, malware detected. Okay, infected file. Click here for details for the user. So that's how you test it two ways. Once you see that, that means the solution works. You can be confident that it works. It's going to catch your viruses as long as the definitions are there. And this test works exactly the same for McAfee or Trend. Okay. And if you hit that console in the Notifier, you'll see right here that there is a file being quarantined. So what are some miscellaneous Trend tips? Well, an important thing is before installing vShield service on each host, make sure that the vCenter is not on that host. vMotion it to a different host. Okay, then install vShield, and then vMotion it back. Same with the filter driver. Remember that any of these installations, they go to the kernel of the SXI host, and if you have vCenter on there, it can break, and you won't have access to your environment. So make sure you move it off to a different host than the one that you're working on. Same thing with the Trend manager and the vShield manager. The only things that you remember you can't move is the security virtual appliances, which stay one per host. They're pinned to a host, okay? That are doing the scanning. Then do not assign a security profile in Trend Manager to the Deep Security Manager VM itself. Remember the one, the Windows VM, where you install the the manager, okay, that manages everything. If you assign a security profile in Deep Security Manager thinking, well, this is a Windows VM, it's got to be protected. I did that before. If you do that, it's going to say anti-malware driver offline, and you're going to get some errors in trend. Okay, so don't do that. And however, you should apply. There is a Deep Security Virtual Appliance profile to each virtual appliance. You should apply that. That works okay. Just the manager, don't apply a profile to the manager. Okay. The shutdown order, like I promised, if you're doing maintenance and you need to shut things down, what do you shut down first? Well, you should shut down the manager first, then the security virtual appliances on each host. If you turn them on, you should start security virtual appliances first, and then the manager. The idea is that the manager, if it doesn't see its security virtual appliances, is going to go a little crazy and pop you a lot of errors. So you want to avoid that. Okay. Finally, when you install vShield or Cloud Networking and Security, how it has been renamed now, that's a whole suite. When you installed it, it modifies the VMX file of each VM. It puts some extra lines in there. Why is that important? Because if you take, say, a template or another VM and move it to your development cluster, which doesn't have vShield, and let's say you create a template, and this is what happened to me. I was happy. I created a nice template, worked for it for a long time, real happy about it, and I moved it to a different cluster which didn't have vShield, and guess what? It does not boot. Why? Because those extra lines for vShield, they prevent it from booting. Okay, and if you forget that, okay, it's going to pop you a booting error, and you just plug it into Google, and you'll get a solution right away saying remove those lines. Didn't put it in here, but yeah, they could just pop that error into Google. So McAfee Move agentless tips. I have much less experience with McAfee Move. So as far as the installation goes, the idea is the same. Okay, I usually start with a VM. Okay, the parent VM that you modify. Okay, that you configure and massage to make sure it's nice and good. Once you do that, then you continue on to the vShield infrastructure from VMware, vShield Manager, the installation of the service, all right? And then you continue on to the antivirus manufacturer controller or manager. In McAfee's case, it's the orchestrator, okay, e-policy orchestrator, which controls everything. And then also in McAfee's case, the difference is, because they are the second to the market with the solution, of course, they don't have as much automation yet, but they're working on it. So in McAfee's case, one gotcha is you got to install the McAfee public CA version 1 certificate, which they provide when you download things from them, okay? And you got to install that into the Windows box from which you deploy the virtual appliance. Okay, so on the Windows box, you got to go into the MMC and deploy and import the certificate. Okay, so that it's in your Windows box. Okay, and McAfee will trust it. Okay. Then, only then, you could deploy the OVF file. All right. The security virtual appliance for McAfee is manual. So unlike in Trend, where it's done from the manager or the controller interface, and you go in and go through the wizard and it just pushes things out. With McAfee, they give you the appliance and they tell you, you got to deploy this OVF onto each host yourself, or they give you a script which you can run, and then it can do that. But it's a little more moving pieces with McAfee. also, with McAfee, you have to manually disable vMotion on each security virtual appliance. And you have to install a McAfee Move agentless extension in ePolicy Orchestrator console, which makes the orchestrator understand what all of this infrastructure is. And finally, in ePolicy Orchestrator, just like with Strand, you deploy a policy and you have to specify a category of security virtual appliance. And you apply this policy to your containers, right? So the process is similar, just a little bit less automation, but look at it this way. McAfee being the second on the market is good because McAfee is owned by Intel. So you can see that there's a lot of people building these solutions, and Trend was first. Trend is not #1 in the market as far as antivirus market share, and they had a good solution and they've improved it. But now there's McAfee also in the market and others, and you have choices, and so the products will improve. So finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues Will Chin and Jose Restrepo, who's sitting right over here, who helped me with some advice for this presentation. And Will couldn't make it to the conference, but yeah, thank you. And please give feedback. It helps me come back. And you can get the slides in 2 days. I will post them. On my blog, I have 2 blogs. My work blog is called Cloud Giraffe. All right, and here's the address. It will be over there. Also, if you want to give me a USB right now, I will give you the slides. Okay, or you can get them in 2 days on my blog. And you can also give me your card. I will email you the slides. And this is my personal blog where I'm going to post again in 2 days this presentation. And I know the conference will distribute it for you also. But sometimes I'm faster than the conferences. Okay. My Twitter email, my personal email, my work email, and my YouTube. Okay. Thank you very much. We still have good time. We have I have 7 extra minutes for questions. So, questions, please. Thank you. Yes. You've been waiting for a lot. Thank you, and thank you for being patient and sitting here all this time. You know. Yes.
You talked about the McAfee,
Mm-hmm.
and then you jumped into the Trend.
Mm-hmm.
Does the McAfee, is the Trend distribute this piece that interfaces to ESXi, to ESX, to VMware? Or was that a separate piece of antivirus software that you're talking about? Because you opened up with the McAfee antivirus, and then you talked about the Trend Manager, right?
Yes. I understand your question. Let me repeat the question. I opened up with McAfee, then I went to Trend, and I went back to McAfee. So I'm sorry I confused you a little bit. Let me clear that up. Both manufacturers have pieces that you have to deploy into VMware, and they distribute, multiple pieces, right? Which, the big pieces are the filter driver, which is a driver for ESX itself, the security virtual appliance, which sits on the ESX and does the scanning, the manager, which controls everything, okay? That's what the manufacturer gives you, and Trend also gives you the notifier inside your VM, all right? On the McAfee side, we have the same thing. We have the manager, which is the orchestrator. We have the security virtual appliance, which does the scanning, and this is what they give you. And then they also have the filter driver that gets installed into ESX. All right? So that's what the manufacturers give you. The McAfee also adds an additional component called extension, McAfee extension for orchestrator, okay, for its own product, where that's what the manufacturers give you. VMware provides you with the vShield manager appliance, which is one appliance, and that deploys vShield services onto each host. Okay, so that's what VMware gives you. All right.
That's the OVF file, right?
Yes, yes. The vShield manager is the OVF file. Some of these other pieces, depending on the manufacturer, also come in OVF file.
You
file.
installment of that,
Yeah,
VMware site.
yeah. So it's a little confusing, I know, but there's a lot of pieces. So once, if you get the presentation,
We've standardized on the McAfee.
mhm. Product, yes.
Can't think of the name of the product. Shield, something Shield, right?
Well, McAfee has, the two other products, right?
Not vShield, it's something Shield.
It's
Virus scan.
virus scan. That's the regular antivirus scan.
Yes.
Then they also have the multi-platform one, which is kind of in the middle between agentless and agent-based, right? It offloads to the server. Then there's that product, just a separate product. And then there's the agentless one. So McAfee has 3 different flavors.
So for the agentless version,
Mhm.
which is what you're talking about here,
Exactly. I talk about only agentless.
what is required from McAfee? What modules are required from McAfee?
Okay. So the modules that McAfee gives you for agentless specifically is what you're looking for. Is the first you need to have the ePolicy orchestrator installed, and that you may already have if you already have this infrastructure. Yes, and if you have that infrastructure already, you already have that.
But I haven't been running the
It's not a monster. I've got over 10,000 units, 10,000 machines being controlled by one server with one SQL dedicated to it.
Oh, okay. SQL instance.
One SQL.
Okay.
10,000 machines here.
Is it required for the McAfee?
Yes, that
That's, it pushes out all the policies and your standards and pulls down your signature files, pulls down your software.
Okay.
It greatly eases your administration.
So you can use the standard ePolicy orchestrator software.
yes.
And that's just, I'm just talking, I haven't gotten it moved yet, that's why I'm here. But your traditional clients, it facilitates all that. Then you put on the move extension, which I'm assuming then integrates in, pushes some of the policies to move some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so for McAfee, first you got to have the ePolicy orchestrator, then you get the move extension, then they also give you the certificate, then they also give you the appliance, okay, and they also give you the filter driver. It's not called the filter driver, it's called differently. But yeah, so they give you all these pieces. When you download the bundle for move, it's all in there. It's all in that bundle, okay? And if yeah, the manual. The only thing with McAfee is there's 2 manuals. There's the deployment guide, and then there's the product guide. You think that you want to be doing deployment guide? No, deployment guide is just a couple of things about like design. For McAfee, follow the product guide, and there's 3 sections for each one of their products. For regular virus scan, for multi-platform, and all the way at the end is for agentless. So skip 2/3 of the product guide, go straight to agentless, and just follow that. So out of maybe 200 pages, you only need to read a third of that. Or you could kind of follow my flow, and you can also add the manual to it for details.
So if you have ePolicy orchestrators,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll manage multiple hosts?
Yes. The question is, if you have ePolicy orchestrator, it will manage multiple hosts. Yes, it will manage all of these hosts. They will all show up.
So single instance of ePolicy orchestrator.
Yep. Yeah, single instance. That's the big kahuna that controls everything.
Okay, now you talked also about spinning up an R2 server
Yes.
to do the management. Is that for Trend?
Well, yes, it is for Trend. Okay.
Need it for McAfee because it has orchestrator.
Well, orchestrator. You follow the orchestrator installation flow. Okay. So yeah, for I forgot if it. I think it runs. Does it run on Windows or?
EPL orchestrator, I've got it running Windows 2008 R2.
There you go.
With SQL 2008 R2.
There you go. So same thing that Trend requires. So thank you.
So I don't need this other that other management console is for Trend that you talked about.
Yeah. I did talk about Trend more because that's what I'm more familiar with. But I did, I did play a bit with McAfee, and
Trying to keep the pieces straight, that's all.
yeah.
Manager is what EPO started as, and McAfee technically stole it from them and actually got sued after the fact.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, McAfee got sued by by Trend for stealing the manager.
And then they've diverted, and EPO is, it's very easy to use. Consolidated reporting for your traditional clients and your move clients.
I have set it up in the past.
Year of the last, I mean, this is 4 years ago, maybe.
I've got 4.6 running, and they've got version 5.0 out now, and it's worlds different.
Good. Glad you're here.
Any more questions? Questions?